You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com on an exciting and beautiful day here in Jerusalem. Yesterday I was there at the Knesset all day watching Israeli democracy in action. I'll be going back there as soon as this show is done, where I'll be covering a very interesting meeting of the Knesset committee that is in charge of deciding whether Israel will be passing a bill about what Israel is, okay? We know that Israel is a Jewish state. We know that Israel is a democracy. Well, how do those two things work together? There's beautiful ways that they work together, and there's also constant tension. Israel is 70 years young and is still trying to figure out what it is. And so Israel is still working on deciding that very integral question of what it is. And so now that we have a right-wing governing coalition, without the checks and balances that there would be of having right-wing parties, centrist parties, and left-wing parties together in a coalition, this is a time that right-wing members of Knesset are trying to use this opportunity to answer that question of what Israel really is. And so they've proposed what's called the Jewish Nation-State Bill. Now, this bill says a lot of different things about what Israel is. It says that Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people, that Jerusalem is Israel's undivided capital, that the national holidays are the holidays of Israel, that the Hebrew language is the official language of Israel, though the Arabic language has a special place and should not be harmed. It says that the menorah with the olive branches is the state emblem. It gives the right to communities in Israel to make them be only open to Jews. Now that's a controversial one. There are people who want to live in places where there are only Jews. And there have been Supreme Court cases that have said you can't do that. You can't have a selection committee that decides who moves into your community that would make a decision based on religion. And so this morning, President Reuven Rivlin, first thing in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, sent a letter to the members of Knesset saying, don't vote for that. Take that out of the bill. Now, this is pretty rare that the president gets involved in politics. The president here is not like the president of the United States. He's more like the Queen of England. He's not supposed to interfere. But presidents in the past have interfered when they felt that their voice must be heard morally as their role of the unifier of the nation. I've been doing this job for a long time, so I'm going to make myself sound old and say that I covered it when our president was Ezra Weitzman in the year 2000, and he interfered a lot. Ezra Weitzman was already then very much an elder statesman of the country, the nephew of our first president. And when you're that old, you're not going to really care about rules anymore. And so Ezra Weitzman constantly interfered when both Netanyahu and Ehud Barak, as prime minister, made decisions that he disagreed with, both on the right and on the left. And Ezra himself was somewhere in between, and saw Netanyahu and Barak as these immature kind of leaders who don't know what they were doing. And he was really right in retrospect on both counts. Netanyahu eventually learned a lot about how to lead. Not necessarily going to say that about Ehud Barak, but so Ezra left and right intervened all the time. Rivlin has been a lot more careful to not intervene. He did on Iran for a little bit, but on an internal matter like this, on whether a community should be allowed to limit itself to only Jews, he has joined together with the Attorney General, whose job is to interfere on things like that, in coming and saying no, no, no. So that is something that all the media here are reporting about as we speak. But yesterday, there was a particular clause here in this bill that I decided that the Jerusalem Post needs to highlight more than other media in Israel do that appeal to readers who are in Israel. The Jerusalem Post has a very special place in that 99% of our readers apparently are on the internet, and very few of readers still read the newspaper in this wonderful dinosaur printed format that I'm holding now. Here, listen to it crinkle, ladies and gentlemen. This is a print newspaper. They still exist, thank God. Crinkle, crinkle. Okay, and so I saw yesterday, it was highlighted to me by another reporter from the Hebrew outlet Makori Shon, that a change had been made in this nation-state bill. The bill had initially said the state of Israel will take action to maintain the connection between the state and the Jewish people wherever they are. Very nice. The bill is making sure people know that this is a Jewish state, and part of the Jewish state's responsibility is to save lives of Jews around the world and keep them connected to Israel. We saw that happen all around the world, with this being July, just celebrated here July 4th. Why do we celebrate July 4th in Israel? American Independence Day? No. What we celebrate on July 4th in Israel is the Independence Day of the hostages who Israel freed from a hijacked plane in Entebbe Airport in Uganda, led by the commander of the elite Sayeret Matkal unit at the time, Yoni Netanyahu, the older brother of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was being groomed to be the prime minister, and whose death really led to the younger Netanyahu, who probably would have been a furniture salesman in the United States, realizing he has to come to Israel, live here, which he apparently was not intending to do, and be a leader. That event changed Israel's history forever. And so that event also is the ultimate example of Israel realizing that it has to protect Jews all around the world and save lives. And it even perhaps sacrificed the life of a future prime minister in order to save the lives of ordinary Jews. So it's a very nice clause. But Netanyahu was having trouble passing this bill, which he saw as the flagship legislation of his Likud party. You know, other parties have their bills. The ultra-Orthodox have their bills. The finance minister has his agenda that he's trying to pass. The Bayit Yehudi party has their religious Zionist agenda. What does the Likud stand for? And so one of the things that Netanyahu decided the Likud stands for is this bill. And people in Likud have called it the most important bill that there's been in a very long time. So in order to pass it, he had to placate the ultra-Orthodox, who are against various things in this bill. And so they negotiated with the ultra-Orthodox, with a member of Knesset whose name is Uri Maklev. I spoke to him yesterday on the steps leading to the press wing of the Knesset. And Uri Maklev said that he got this clause changed. Instead of saying that the state will take action to maintain the connection between the state and the Jewish people wherever they are, the new version says that the state will take action to help the Jewish people in the diaspora, meaning anywhere but here in Israel. Why would he not want to help diaspora Jews in Israel? The answer is the agenda of diaspora Jews in Israel is to make Israel a little bit more like the diaspora. In America, for instance, most Jews are unaffiliated, Reform, or conservative. Orthodox Jews are a small minority. growing every day by leaps and bounds, in part because of the success of the Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins all over America and really all over the world, but still a minority. Whereas in Israel, the majority of Jews are Masorti. Masorti means traditional. The conservative movement decided to call themselves the Masorti movement, in part because it attracts people here in Israel who see themselves as traditional. Well, what does it mean, traditional? It could mean anything. It's a lowercase t. It's not a capital T. It can mean all kinds of things when people are self-defining. And so here in Israel, the Orthodox, people who define themselves as Orthodox, are a minority. 10% define themselves as ultra-Orthodox, religious, and 10% define themselves as religious Zionist, modern Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox believe in learning Torah full-time, and if they don't learn Torah full-time, if they work, then they're seeing that as a fallback that they're doing to support their families if they can't learn Torah full-time for whatever reason. Whereas among the religious Zionists, modern Orthodox, they believe working is very much a commandment, especially in the land of Israel, in making the land grow in both the literal sense as it was when Israel had a more agriculturally focused economy, and now in a more of a figurative sense when Israel has more of a high-tech based economy. It's still growing the land. Religious Zionist, modern Orthodox people, who are the overwhelming majority of show hosts here at the Land of Israel Network, believe that they have a religious commandment to do their job, including do these radio shows, which are, I think, 2 or 3 mitzvahs wrapped into one. The rabbis here can explain that better than me. But it's still a minority. Only 20%, if you do the math, are Orthodox. Again, growing, because this time because of demographic rates of how many children people have. But still a small minority. And so the Diaspora Jews, who would like there to be more religious pluralism in Israel, have a tough time advancing it. They're doing it a little bit via schools. There's a school system here called the Tali school system. That's a religious pluralism school system that the conservative movement here is involved in. The Reform movement has tried to attract people to their synagogues with all kinds of cultural programs and everything. But they're not making a lot of headway, and they'd be the first ones to admit it. So, the Western Wall, over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of talk about expanding a egalitarian prayer site that is at the Western Wall, but in the southern part of it. It was built, this egalitarian prayer site, by Naftali Bennett, by the Diaspora Affairs Minister in both the current and the previous government. He built it in the previous government when he had an advisor on Diaspora Affairs named Yaakov Katz, who's now the editor of the Jerusalem Post. He, overnight, without asking anyone, built this Azarat Yisrael, this place that men and women wouldn't be separated at the Western Wall, which was a controversial thing to do and a very Israeli thing to do, to build something without asking any questions. And after you build it, eventually you need permits and everything, and you need to make it more organized. And that's what's going on right now behind the scenes, is Netanyahu had an agreement with the ultra-Orthodox that would set this area as an area of ultra-Orthodox prayer. The ultra-Orthodox initially agreed to a couple controversial things, that there would be an entrance to this egalitarian prayer site from near where the current entrance is, where you have the men and women separately, and number two, that area would be overseen by a body that included Reform and conservative Jewish leaders, which would be the first official recognition of religious streams here. And after the ultra-Orthodox politicians agreed to this as part of a greater compromise in the Western Wall deal, they then reneged on it after their media made them look really bad. The media that's intended for the ultra-Orthodox community. And then Netanyahu gave in to the ultra-Orthodox, giving in to the ultra-Orthodox media, and reneged on the deal in June of 2017. And so now, instead of operating via that deal, Netanyahu has been kind of implementing part of it, not those two controversial clauses of recognizing the Reform and Conservative movements as part of overseeing that area and not having an entrance from where the men and women sit separately, stand separately, but at least working on making this egalitarian prayer site be more organized and built up there in that portion of that southern portion of the Western Wall. Now, in order to receive these official kinds of permits, it had to be approved by the Ministerial Committee on Holy Sites, which oversees the Israel Antiquities Authority, because where they're building the egalitarian prayer site is an archaeological park. And so Likud and Bayit ministers and Shas, Sephardi ultra-Orthodox ministers, who are part of this committee, they all resigned. And because they all resigned, now they can't meet. Netanyahu found a replacement for one of the ministers. Now two more have to be replaced, and aren't exactly a lot of volunteers to pick up that hot potato. And so right now, that effort has kind of hit a snag. And even though that committee of ministers did meet on Sunday, they didn't have their scheduled vote. And so right now it's kind of up in the air what's going to be happening over there. And the leaders of the Reform and Conservative movements and leaders of American Jewry in general called Netanyahu's failure to implement the Western Wall deal betrayal of diaspora Jews, and saw that Netanyahu cared more about helping his ultra-Orthodox coalition partners than he cared about them. So that was a year ago, and then really reiterated with what happened over the past couple of weeks with this. And then now comes back this nation-state bill, where Netanyahu is once again giving in to the ultra-Orthodox, changing that clause, saying basically Israel isn't going to be helping diaspora Jews in Israel, only around the world. Here their rights are limited. Here Israel has no obligation toward them, which is quite a controversial thing to say. Now, this was done by his long arm in the Knesset, the tourism minister, Yariv Levin, who is the ministerial liaison to the Knesset, is one of his titles. But Netanyahu definitely signed off on it. He definitely was aware of this, and he didn't say, wait a second, I've already got in trouble for siding with the ultra-Orthodox over the diaspora too many times. Maybe this isn't the thing to give in on. No, Netanyahu did give in. Netanyahu intends to pass this bill, and if that means giving in to the ultra-Orthodox and sacrificing the diaspora, he's going to do it again. And I met yesterday with the Knesset speaker, Yuli Edelstein. He was meeting with reporters in the cafeteria who were asking him all kinds of questions about his political aspirations and everything, and about the way the Knesset's image is right now. I asked him about this clause, about sacrificing the diaspora for the ultra-Orthodox, and I expected him to be outraged because Yuli Edelstein really gets the diaspora. He's a former diaspora affairs minister himself. He's married to the head of what's called the Diaspora Museum, the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv, which I encourage people to go visit. He said no. He called what I wrote an over-analysis. Okay, that's his opinion. Strangely enough, Michael Oren also downplayed it. Michael Oren, who very much understands diaspora Jewry, being much of his life himself, being born in New York and raised in the great community of West Orange, New Jersey. He said he doesn't expect that clause to have any actual practical impact. He said it's not like the Supreme Court will rule against the Women of the Wall or somebody else who wants to pray there, because this clause says that the diaspora Jews would be helped elsewhere, not in Israel. But then I called up a member of Knesset from the opposition who happens to pray regularly at a conservative synagogue in the community of Pardes Chana. She's a member of Knesset you've probably never heard of. Her name is Yael Cohen-Paran. She is a member of the Green Movement. She's an environmentalist. That's her career. She's been involved in environmental issues her whole life. And this Green Movement merged together with Tzipi Livni's Hatnuah, which merged together with the Labour Party to form the Zionist Union. Almost no one knows that the Zionist Union actually has 3 parties, not 2. The Green Movement is part of it as well. And so Yael Cohen-Paran said to me last night, the government continues to put a finger in the eye of diaspora Jews and tell them we love them there but not here. The surrender of Netanyahu and the coalition to the ultra-Orthodox deepens the rift between Israel and the Jewish people abroad. And so that is very much a point of view that has to be taken into account, really speaking for diaspora Jews, which she's not one of, but definitely for Israeli Jews who want there to be religious pluralism here. And look, all points here are legitimate. The point of view of Netanyahu is legitimate. The point of view of Orthodox Jews in Israel who don't want there to be encroachment of foreign kinds of Judaism here is legitimate. They say this isn't a country that goes by the Jewish tradition that there's been for 3,000 years, and it's an Orthodox Jewish tradition. And the Likud, while it has a growing Orthodox population, also is mostly traditional, and those traditional Jews, the overwhelming majority of them, the synagogue that they don't go to very often, or they go to and then watch a soccer game at home, is an Orthodox synagogue. And the point of view of diaspora pluralist Jews is legitimate, of wanting to have a place to pray here and wanting the government of Israel to serve them as well. And the point of view of Orthodox Jews in America, who are a growing community, especially the Chabad community, is also legitimate. And then they're saying out loud, diaspora Jews aren't all one big block. We're there too, and you have to take us into account as well. So this is all part of the beauty of Israeli democracy, that I have such an honor to have a front row seat to watch in action from my office in the Knesset, and from my perch over here in a beautiful corner of Jerusalem where we tape our show here every week on Inside Israel Today, on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com. We'll be back next week when I'll be sitting here right after the Knesset has its last long Monday night of legislation, working on passing controversial bills like that nation-state bill, like perhaps the draft bill for the ultra-Orthodox, all kinds of other bills that are deciding what Israel is inside Israel today. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful day from here in Jerusalem. Bye-bye.
Every time there was an offer for the Palestinians and they said no, they were rewarded. The negotiations weren't working.
Is conflict over when one side declares victory or the other side declares defeat? Hopefully you'll get the answers on today's Rejuvenation with me, Eve Harrow, on the Land of Israel Network, as I bring you the recordings from the Victory Caucus in the Knesset in Jerusalem from just a few days ago.
Rejuvenation with Eve Harrow at thelandofisrael.com.